unions have always played a very important role here in Australia. We go back hundreds of years, the Eureka Stockade, the Shearers strike, and of course the Labor Party out in Barcaldine basically was formed as a result of the Shearers strike and some issues in that part of the world. Always been very important for workers. But of course, in this day and age, things have changed quite dramatically. And, regardless of your political position, I think the stranglehold that unions have certainly on political parties, and particularly the ALP here in Australia, is a bit of a concern. And in so many ways, it paralyses industry and it paralyses communities to a degree as well. My special guest this morning, Graham Haycroft, he's actually the founder of Red Unions and also the founder of a slightly different, I guess, a different initiative here in regional and, of course, Australia. I guess the principle goes a little wider. Graham, nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Oh, pleasure. No, pleasure.
Graham, let's talk a little bit more about Red Unions because my partner, she's a member, she's actually a teacher, and she actually got angry one day when she heard about the union that she was involved in, basically having a piss-up and spending her money on a piss-up. And obviously those political connections, that's the reason why you founded Red Unions, and it's doing very well right across certainly Queensland, I understand.
Yes, indeed. We've got nearly 20,000, nearly 20,500, and we're set up in New Zealand as well. Put the two together, we're racing towards 21,000. But that's right. We set it up about 2012. I retired, and I was approached by a bunch of nurses who were friends, and they said, "Gee, Graham, why don't you start a nurse union?" And I had a look at it, and I thought, they don't do very much for the money, so. I did a little bit of research and we set the thing up based on the Sunshine Coast, and it's just grown steadily from there. But of course, we pose an existential threat to the traditional unions because they're not separate. See, the nurse, we started with the nurse union and then moved to the teacher union. We've got a few others as well, but they're the main two. People think they're different. They're actually wings of the ALP, and there's nothing wrong with this. The nurse unions and the teacher unions are the financial arms, if you like, of the Labor Party. That's where the money comes from. And it's interesting when you look at the volume, if you want me to talk about that.
Yeah, and look, when it comes to the fees, obviously it does cost a bit to actually run a union. You get a synergy when you get bigger numbers and it makes it cheaper on an individual basis. But obviously there's an excess, there's a profit there. And look, let's take the politics out of it. It doesn't matter, which brand of politics it may be. But if you get large unions that have a monopoly and a stranglehold and the money's going back to one political party, there's a fundamental issue there.
Oh, absolutely. When I read the Constitution for the Red Unions, that's the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland and now Australia, and the Teachers Professional Association of Queensland and Australia. And I made it quite specific that there could be no member money used for any party political purpose. That was to completely differentiate ourselves from the others. We're not a conservative, we're a conservative union, but we do not financially support the LNP in any way, shape or form. And the numbers are interesting, as you said, there are economies of scale. And with about 20,000 members, it cost us a bit over $400 to provide the service. We're charging about $450, $460 or something for full-time membership. Now, what happens when you get bigger and you get more numbers? You get to 40,000 or 60,000, you can do it for $200, $250. And both the teacher and nurse unions charge about $750, and it only costs them $250, so there's about $500 left. So with our 20,000 members, you could say on one hand, we've stopped $10 million going to the ALP, but forget about that number. And just look at the amount of number. You've got 100,000 teachers and nurses roughly in Queensland. At $500 per head per member, there's $50 million a year that's being used to support the ALP.
Yeah.
This is a tremendous advantage. You ever wonder why the LNP barely is visible in this election campaign? It's because they're outspent about 20 to 1.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, let's move on to your more recent initiative, the Local Action Australia. I believe you've been in Cairns in the last week or so. Explain this to me because, I guess if you're saying, you're from a conservative background, obviously economic rationalism and often centralising thing is one of the key tenets of the economic concepts that you're talking about from that conservative perspective. But in a lot of ways, what you're talking about can be seen as a bit of a socialist perspective where you're actually putting more of the power back to local people, thus Local Action Australia. Tell me a little bit more about this concept and how it fits in.
Well, it started with just a little bit of research we did for nurses and teachers, and we discovered, and it wasn't easy to find, by the way, it's well hidden, the ratio of teachers to bureaucrats and the nurses to bureaucrats is 2 to 1. I mean, this is just nonsense. For every 2 teachers, every 2 nurses, there's a bureaucrat somewhere, mainly in Brisbane, and they don't help. It's been 56 years since I last taught, but we didn't have any bureaucratic overload. The bosses, I remember at Hampton High School in Victoria, Melbourne, he had a secretary. That was it. The only thing that came from outside the school was our checks.
Yeah.
And in those days, I'm not saying that they were better, but we could measure the economic outcomes, the education outcomes.
Yeah.
And it was actually better. And I mean, I didn't, not that I helped it very much. I was teaching for a very short time and loved it. But today, the teachers can't control the classroom because of the rules set by the bureaucracy and this huge wave of interference that your wife would know only too well. I mean, it takes 10 years to become a teacher.
Sure.
And they're told what to do by these bloody faceless bureaucrats. And then there's thousands of them. And all this nonsense, curriculum, that's all coming from, it's not coming from Cairns, it's coming from Brisbane and from Canberra. So what we've done is we set up a separate organisation called Local Action Australia, which is to start, see if we can find candidates in the local areas who are prepared, and we'll give them a hand, to run on the basis of bringing the problems back locally, or the solution to the problems back locally, by changing the legislation. This applies right across the main areas. I mean, Cairns Hospital is a basket case, as are all the hospitals in Queensland, by the way. The solution is not having more bureaucrats in somewhere in Brisbane, working out what needs to be done. They wouldn't have a clue. They are the problem. The solution is let's have a local board elected by the locals, and the only thing that comes from Brisbane should be money. And this should be done basically by formula, not by discretion, and let the locals run it. They couldn't possibly do a worse job than what's happening now. I would suggest that they'll do an excellent job because they've got a vested interest in doing it. Same with the schools. Let the parents decide what the curriculum should be.
But when it comes to some of the issues, and I guess coming back to I guess the scale and I guess the momentum you get with scale, aren't there universal issues when it comes to I guess standardising education like they do with NAPLAN, so you can actually compare things within education, areas from areas. When it comes to healthcare, even when it comes to things like youth crime, and that's something we discussed off air. Sometimes there's bigger issues there, so. Isn't a central type of approach necessary in some of these areas, though?
Well, but the centralisation, the only thing the centres can do well, if you like, is collect information and impart it to everybody else. I have no problem with the NAPLAN sort of structure because then you have the sort of a comparative test of the respective value of each school. Nothing wrong with that, but that's all it needs to be. The parents can work it out from there. There's this debate going on, NAPLAN's bad because it doesn't tell you the whole story. No, it doesn't. It's a pretty fair, a reasonable part of it. Parents aren't stupid, for crying out loud. It's their children. Parents should decide it, and what we've got to do with them in the education sector is give the parents the power to move their children from one school to another. That's basically all you have to do, and then you let the schools run themselves. The parents aren't stupid. They will find out ways to compare schools, and they'll talk to each other. And all this nonsense about should my 8-year-old child be taught gender reassignment theory? President, we shouldn't even be discussing that. Could you imagine if parents actually had the ability to move their children easily from one school to another, whether anyone would even be talking about such nonsense?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, it's an interesting concept, and I said in some ways some of the issues that we do have, I'll be straight with you. I can see that certainly the economic rationalism and some of that conservative approach has probably contributed to the issue, but I guess also taking your approach, which in some ways might be seen as a bit of a socialist approach in some ways, and actually localising things, localising some of the, the solutions to local issues does make a lot of sense as well. So it's an interesting combination of basically the left and the right, Graham.
Well, you have a different definition of socialism than I have. Socialism is about centralism, essentially, and having central control. That's essentially the problem with it. The conservative view, generally, although it's not the current mob, is that the best solutions come close to home, the principle of subsidiarity. Catholic listeners would understand that term. Decisions about issues should be made, where possible, as close as possible to where the problem is. So you have a local crime problem, and you have a ripper in Cairns, where you've got 70 resi homes with 90% of the local youth crime coming from source to those places. Surely the best place to have that fixed is Cairns. I don't know what the solution is, but I'm pretty sure that people in Cairns will be able to work out a solution. So we want prepared to run for the Parliament in Cairns who'll say, I want legislation that says we can form a board or get a board elected and we can make the decision which will fix the problem. And you'd want to be involving the Aboriginal communities as well in that. They're not happy with what's going on.
Well, look, it is an interesting concept, and I guess I'm probably talking about not socialism in its wider philosophical perspective, but I guess that social aspect of actually doing things local. So maybe socialism is not the best term for it, but I guess that social aspect of doing things maybe more on a grassroots level here, and that's why I'm kind of making the synergy there with the left as well. Check it out. It's called Local Action Australia. Graham Haycroft is the man that's actually behind Red Unions. Interesting discussion this morning, and I think some interesting things moving forward. We're likely to be hearing more from Local Action Australia. Graham, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been great to talk to you.